My family disowned me for being ugly. 13 years later, I crashed my sister's wedding and exposed the truth. For the past 11 years, I told myself that I had moved on. I convinced myself that the past was behind me, that I had no reason to think about them anymore, that I had built a life for myself far away from the people who threw me away like I was nothing more than an unwanted burden, an inconvenience, a stain on their perfect little world. I told myself I was happy, that I was free, that I had outgrown the desperate need for closure, validation, or even revenge. And maybe, for a while, I actually believed it. But then the invitation arrived. An elegant, ivory envelope with embossed gold lettering, my name written in a delicate cursive that looked like it belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had never been erased from their family, someone who had never been told they were not good enough to belong. It smelled of money, of luxury, of a world that had never wanted me in it. And inside, on thick, expensive cardstock, were the words that made my stomach twist into something dark and ugly and entirely unexpected. You are invited to the wedding of Milena Petrova and Vadim Ivanov, my sister, getting married. In the grandest venue in the city, a place meant for royalty, for the elite, for people whose lives revolved around status and appearances and the illusion of perfection. It was a performance, the ultimate display of wealth and power, a night that would be remembered for years to come. And for some reason, after everything they had done to me, after everything they had said, they wanted me there. At first, I considered throwing it away, ignoring it, pretending it never arrived. But something about it gnawed at me, something sharp and bitter and relentless. Why now? Why, after 11 years of silence, of pretending I never existed, did they suddenly decide to acknowledge me again? Was it guilt? A pathetic attempt at reconciliation? Or was it something worse, another cruel joke, another way to remind me that no matter how much time had passed, I would always be an outsider looking in? I spent 3 days staring at that invitation, my fingers tracing the raised gold lettering, my thoughts an endless loop of memories I had worked so hard to bury. The night they threw me out. The way my mother's face had been cold, unreadable, her voice a quiet, emotionless decree of finality. The way my father barely looked at me, his disappointment weighing heavier than any words ever could. And Milena, my perfect sister, standing in the doorway with that smirk on her lips, watching as I disappeared into the night, as if she had won some silent battle she had been fighting all along. I wasn't supposed to come back. I wasn't supposed to ever be seen again. And maybe that was exactly why I decided to go. Not for them. Not for some childish fantasy of an apology that would never come. But for me. To look them in the eyes, to walk through their world with my head held high, to show them that I had survived without them, that I had built a life for myself despite their best efforts to break me. And if I happened to ruin their perfect evening in the process, well, that would just be a bonus. The Grand Belograd Hotel was one of the most exclusive venues in the city, a place dripping with old-world elegance, its crystal chandeliers casting golden light across marble floors, its vaulted ceilings adorned with hand-painted frescoes that made the entire space feel like something out of a fairy tale. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of 100 eyes turning toward me, the hum of whispered conversation shifting, the barely concealed gasps of recognition as people tried to piece together whether the woman standing in the entrance, the one who had been so easily discarded all those years ago, was really who they thought she was. I took my time making my way through the ballroom, weaving between clusters of guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, pretending I didn't hear the murmurs trailing in my wake. I could feel the tension thickening with every step, the awareness of my presence rippling through the room like a slow-moving storm, unsettling, inevitable. And then I heard it. A sharp, clipped voice, filled with barely restrained fury. What the hell is she doing here? The crowd parted like the sea, and there she was, standing near the altar, her pristine white dress hugging her frame like it had been made just for her, her dark eyes burning with disbelief and something dangerously close to rage. Milena. And beside her, standing stiff and frozen, his complexion paling by the second, was Vadim. The man I had once loved. The man who had promised me forever. The man who had helped destroy me. Silence stretched through the room, suffocating and thick, as realization dawned on everyone present. I watched as Milena's perfectly rehearsed smile cracked, as her fingers tightened around her bouquet, as Vadim's hands curled into fists at his sides, his entire body going rigid with the kind of panic that only comes when the past refuses to stay buried. I tilted my head, letting a slow, knowing smile pull at my lips. "Oh, don't stop on my account," I said, my voice smooth, effortless, dripping with the kind of confidence I had spent years teaching myself how to wear like armor. "I wouldn't want to ruin your big day." But we all knew. I already had. The silence stretched unbearably, thick with tension and the weight of 100 unspoken words. Around me, guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to stare, others openly gawking, their curiosity feeding off the scandal they could sense brewing in the air. The live orchestra had stopped playing mid-piece. The murmur of polite conversation had died completely, and all that was left was the stunned, wide-eyed horror painted across my sister's perfect face. Milena looked like she was trying to decipher a nightmare, her mind desperately attempting to make sense of what was happening, trying to twist reality back into the polished, controlled world she had so carefully constructed. But she wasn't in control anymore, and neither was Vadim. I could feel the way his body had gone stiff, his entire posture screaming discomfort, his face drained of color, his hands twitching ever so slightly at his sides, as if he wanted to run but knew he couldn't. Not here. Not now. Not when every single person he respected was watching. My mother was the first to recover. She stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, her expensive silk gown barely moving as she carried herself toward me with the kind of quiet, lethal grace only a woman like her could master. The look on her face was pure disgust, as if my mere presence had tainted her perfect evening, as if I had contaminated the very air they were breathing. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice even, controlled, the way it had always been when she was delivering the final blow. I smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a guilty smile. A slow, deliberate, dangerous smile. "Oh, Mama," I murmured, my tone syrupy sweet, laced with just enough amusement to make her eye twitch. That's strange, because I distinctly remember receiving an invitation. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't react immediately, and I could practically see the calculations happening in her head. She was trying to decide the best course of action, whether to cause a scene or sweep me under the rug like she had done over a decade ago. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't so easily discarded this time. Milena took a sharp breath, her fingers digging into her bouquet, her knuckles turning white from how tightly she was holding it. "You weren't supposed to come," she said, and there was something in her voice, not fear, exactly, but close. I tilted my head. "Oh? Then why did I get an invitation?" Her lips parted, but for the first time in her life, she had no answer. Because she hadn't sent it. Someone had. And the moment that realization dawned on her, I saw it. Panic. She turned her head slightly, looking at Vadim, her expression searching, demanding, accusing. And Vadim, poor, pathetic Vadim, stood frozen beside her, his face an unreadable mask, his hands still curled into tight fists, his entire being screaming guilt, guilt, guilt. The room was so quiet it felt deafening. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Milena's face twisted into something ugly. She took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing, her breathing shallow. "What do you want?" she hissed. Ah, there it was. The mask was slipping. The perfect bride, the golden daughter, the elegant, sophisticated socialite that my mother had spent years grooming was starting to crack. I took my time, letting my gaze sweep over the lavish venue, the extravagant floral arrangements, the ridiculous ice sculptures, the sheer absurdity of it all. And then, deliberately, I let my eyes land on Vadim. "I came to congratulate you," I said, my tone light, playful, as if this were nothing more than a casual encounter. "I mean, it's not every day your sister marries your ex." The impact of my words was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd, murmurs exploding like a wave, guests looking at one another in shock, in glee, in barely contained excitement. Because this was something they could sink their teeth into. Milena recoiled like I had struck her. Vadim flinched. And my mother, oh, my poor, unfortunate mother, looked like she was about to have a stroke. "That's a lie," Milena spat, her voice shaking slightly. "You're lying." I raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Vadim sucked in a sharp breath. Milena whipped around to face him so fast her veil nearly snapped off. "Tell her," she demanded, her voice rising. "Tell her she's lying." Vadim hesitated. And that was his first mistake. Melena's chest rose and fell rapidly, her fingers trembling as she reached for Vadim's arm, gripping it hard. Vadim. Her voice was different now, more desperate. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't deny it. And that was his second mistake. Because in the world my mother had built, silence was an admission of guilt. The moment stretched long and thin, fragile as glass, waiting to shatter. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, I pulled my phone out of my purse, tapped the screen, and the massive projector screen behind the altar lit up. The entire room collectively gasped, because on the screen, filling the space in perfect, high-definition clarity, were text messages. Hundreds of them. Explicit, undeniable. Between me and Vadim. Time-stamped from just 6 months ago. A sharp, wounded sound tore from Melena's throat. My mother staggered back, pale as death. Vadim, sweet, stupid Vadim, actually turned to run. And the wedding? The wedding was over. The sound that came from my sister was something primal, something raw, something so completely unlike the polished, poised woman she had spent her entire life pretending to be. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was something deeper, something uglier, something she had never thought she would have to feel. Because Melena had never lost before. Not once. Not to anyone. Certainly not to me. But tonight, in front of hundreds of guests, in front of her friends, her in-laws, her colleagues, our parents, in front of the people she had spent her entire life trying to impress, she was losing. And the worst part? She knew it was my fault. Vadim was already stepping away from her, his movement stiff, robotic, like a man preparing to flee the scene of a crime. His face had gone completely white, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead under the ballroom lights. He knew there was no talking his way out of this. No charming smile, no well-placed excuse, no last-minute plea that could save him. The evidence was right there, projected for all to see. And the room? The room was eating it up. The gasps had turned into full-fledged murmurs, the shocked whispers into quiet laughter, the kind of vicious amusement that comes when the mighty fall, when the people who built their lives on perfection and superiority are exposed for the frauds they really are. Melena must have realized it too, because in one sudden, violent motion, she whirled around and slapped Vadim across the face. The crack of it echoed through the stunned silence. Vadim staggered back, his head snapping to the side, his expression shifting from guilt to disbelief. And then she was screaming, "You disgusting, lying, cheating piece of..." She didn't even finish. Didn't need to. Because Vadim turned and ran. Actually, physically ran. A full-grown man, dressed in a custom-tailored wedding suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment, sprinting down the marble aisle like he thought he could escape the sheer humiliation that was swallowing him whole. And the moment he bolted, the room exploded. Laughter. Shouting. Gasps. Someone, God, someone actually clapped. My mother let out a horrified sound, one that didn't even sound human, like a wounded animal caught in a trap. Her face had gone sheet white, her lips pressed together so tightly that I thought she might actually faint from sheer rage. She turned toward me so quickly I almost expected her to lunge at me, her eyes dark and vicious, her whole body trembling with barely restrained fury. "You," she hissed, and oh, she wanted to kill me. I had seen my mother angry before. I had seen her cruel. I had seen her cold, manipulative, cutting, indifferent. But I had never seen her lose control. Until now. Because this wasn't something she could sweep under the rug. This wasn't something she could erase, rewrite, twist into a version of the truth that suited her. The entire world had seen it. Her guests, her peers, the high society snobs she had spent decades climbing over and bowing to, they had witnessed the fall of her golden daughter. And I was standing there, smiling. She hated me for it. "You ruined this family," she spat, her voice trembling. And I laughed. Actually, truly laughed. Not a quiet chuckle. Not a smirk. A full, delighted, wicked laugh. "Oh, Mama," I sighed, tilting my head. "I didn't ruin this family. You did. You just don't like that people finally saw it." She looked like she wanted to hit me. For a split second, I thought she actually might. But she didn't. Because Melena moved first. And instead of attacking me, she grabbed the nearest champagne tower and shoved it off the table. The glasses crashed to the floor, shattering into a million jagged shards, golden liquid spilling across the marble in a way that looked almost beautiful. Someone screamed. I didn't even blink. Milena was losing her mind. She tore the veil from her hair, her perfectly styled updo already beginning to unravel, the once pristine curls falling in messy, tangled strands around her face. This was supposed to be my night, she was saying, voice shaking, eyes wild. This was supposed to be perfect. You weren't even supposed to be here. You were never supposed to be here. And that was it, wasn't it? That was the truth. She had never wanted me here. I wasn't supposed to be part of her perfect life. I wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And yet, here I was, standing in the wreckage of everything she had ever wanted. She turned back to me, her breathing ragged, her hands curled into claws, her white dress soaked with spilled champagne, her cheeks streaked with angry, humiliated tears. She looked nothing like the poised, elegant woman my mother had raised. She looked like a mess, like a loser. And I was still standing, still whole, still smiling. Why? She whispered, her voice breaking. Why did you do this? And this time, I told the truth. Because you threw me away, I said softly, looking her directly in the eye. And I wanted you to know how it feels. Her face crumbled. She made a sound, something small and broken, something that almost sounded like a sob, before she turned and ran. Just like Vadim. Just like the coward she was. The wedding was ruined. The guests were staring. My mother was seething. And me? I turned. I walked out. I didn't look back. Because for the first time in 11 years, I had already won. Would you have crashed the wedding too? Or would you have let karma do the work? Let's talk in the comments. I left the wedding with my head high, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the murmurs of the guests a distant hum in my ears. The air outside was cold, crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom where my family's perfect illusion had just gone up in flames. I took a deep breath, inhaling the night air, letting the satisfaction of what I had done settle deep in my bones. And for the first time in 11 years, I felt free. But I should have known, the past doesn't let go that easily. Because just as I reached the parking lot, I heard footsteps pounding behind me, fast and desperate, the sound of someone chasing me down. Darina. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I knew that voice. Vadim. The man who had promised me forever. The man who had helped destroy me. The man who had just lost everything. And now, when there was nothing left to hide, when the whole world knew what he had done, when his carefully crafted lie had collapsed in front of everyone who mattered to him, now he wanted to talk. I kept walking. But he grabbed my wrist. And I let him. Because I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he had no power over me anymore. His grip was firm, but not tight enough to hurt. He wasn't trying to control me, not this time. But his fingers trembled slightly, just enough for me to notice. He was afraid. Good. I turned to face him, slowly, deliberately, letting my expression stay calm, unreadable. Vadim looked like hell. His tie was loose, his once pristine suit now wrinkled, the redness of Milena's slap still burned into his cheek. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he had run his hands through it too many times in frustration, and his usually sharp, confident gaze was now shaken, desperate, lost. Darina, he said again, softer this time, almost like a plea. I just looked at him. Why? His voice cracked. Why did you do this? I almost laughed. It was the exact same question Milena had asked me. But unlike my sister, Vadim wasn't just angry. He was genuinely confused. Because in his mind, I was still that same girl who had once loved him, once trusted him, once believed every lie he had ever told. He thought I had done this because I was still hurt, because I wanted revenge. But the truth? The truth was so much simpler. I stepped closer, just enough for him to see the absolute calm certainty in my eyes. Because I could, I said. The words hit him like a slap. He blinked, his breath hitching, his fingers loosening around my wrist. I pulled away. You never thought I'd come back, did you? I tilted my head, studying his face. You thought I would just stay gone, that I'd be too weak, too broken to ever look you in the eye again. He didn't answer, didn't deny it, because we both knew it was true. For 11 years, he had lived with the certainty that I was a mistake erased, a ghost of his past that would never return. He had married my sister with the full confidence that I was gone, that I would never dare to ruin the life he had built on lies and betrayal. But I had. And now he had to live with it. Vadim exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair, his frustration slipping through the cracks of his carefully maintained composure. Darina, I didn't. He hesitated, looking away for a brief second before dragging his gaze back to mine. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at him for a long moment, and then I laughed. A slow, soft, amused laugh, because that was the most pathetic thing he could have possibly said. You never meant to hurt me? I repeated, shaking my head. Vadim, you helped my family throw me away. You stood there while they erased me from their lives, while Milena laughed in my face, while my mother told me I was nothing. And then I swallowed, my voice turning colder, sharper, the old wounds burning fresh in my chest. Then you went and built a life with them. Like I never existed. His jaw clenched. I thought you were gone, he muttered, his tone defensive now, like he was trying to convince himself that he had done nothing wrong. I thought you didn't want. You never thought about what I wanted. I cut him off, my voice unwavering. You only ever thought about yourself. He flinched. And for the first time since he had run after me, I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Regret. Not just because he got caught. Not just because he had lost everything. But because, for the first time, he was starting to understand. He had spent 11 years thinking I was the weak one. But tonight, he had seen the truth. I was stronger than him. Stronger than Milena. Stronger than the family that had spent their entire lives trying to break me. And I had won. I turned away, stepping back toward my car. Darina, Vadim called after me, his voice quieter, hoarse. Wait. I didn't stop. You'll regret this, he said, almost like a warning, almost like a curse. I opened the car door. Paused for just a second. And then I looked at him over my shoulder, meeting his desperate, exhausted gaze with nothing but pure, unshaken confidence. Not as much as you will. And with that, I got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving him behind, leaving all of them behind. For good. I drove through the city streets without looking back, the golden lights of the skyline blurring past me, the echoes of the wedding still ringing in my ears. The distant laughter, the shattered glass, the weight of my mother's fury, the raw disbelief on Milena's face, and the sound of Vadim's voice calling after me, it all lingered in the air like the remnants of a storm. But the moment I crossed the city limits, the noise faded, dissolving into nothing but a memory, a relic of a past that no longer had any hold over me. For the first time in 11 years, I had walked straight into my family's world and left on my own terms. No more running. No more hiding. I had faced them. And I had won. So why, then, did my hands still feel unsteady on the wheel? Why did my heart still pound like some distant, forgotten wound had been reopened? Why did it feel like, despite everything, the past had still found a way to crawl under my skin? I forced a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to shake the feeling. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. Maybe it was the fact that, no matter how much I had wanted to walk away without feeling a damn thing, a part of me still ached. Not for them. Not for the family that had discarded me, but for the girl I had once been. For the version of me who had wanted so badly to be loved. She had died the night they threw her out. And yet, somehow, she had still been standing in that ballroom. I reached my apartment just before dawn, exhaustion settling into my bones, heavier than I expected. The quiet hum of the city outside felt almost alien after the chaos of the wedding. And for a moment, I just sat in my car, staring at my own front door like it was something distant, unfamiliar. I had spent 11 years building a life away from them. And yet, in the span of a single night, the past had crashed back into me like a wrecking ball. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. It was over. I had done what I came to do. I had nothing left to say. I told myself that, over and over. But the next morning, when my phone buzzed, when I saw her name on the screen, I realized the past still had one last trick up its sleeve. Milena, calling me. After 11 years of silence. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the answer button, my pulse ticking in my throat. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to ignore it, to pretend I had already closed this chapter. But another part of me, the part that had waited for this moment longer than I wanted to admit, picked up. I didn't speak first. Neither did she. For a moment, there was only silence, a heavy, suffocating thing that stretched between us, thick with everything we had never said. And then, finally, she exhaled sharply. Are you happy now? Her voice was hoarse, like she had spent the entire night crying, like the carefully cultivated mask she had worn for years had finally cracked beyond repair. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. I don't know, I said honestly. Are you? She let out a sharp, humorless laugh, one that held none of the smug confidence she had always carried herself with. You ruined everything, she said, and there was something broken in the way she said it. I closed my eyes for a second, pinching the bridge of my nose. No, Milena, I murmured. You did. She sucked in a breath, and for the first time since she had called, she sounded small. Did you ever love him? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, once, a long time ago, I did. But not anymore. I loved the man I thought he was, I admitted. But that man never really existed, did he? She was quiet for a long moment. And then, softer than before, she asked, Did he love you? I let out a breath, leaning my head back against the chair. I think he loved himself more. There was another stretch of silence. And then, to my surprise, she laughed. A real laugh. Bitter. Tired. Defeated. I should hate you, she said. You do, I said simply. She didn't argue. But then, she asked something I hadn't expected. Do you ever wonder, she said, voice quieter now, if maybe we were both just victims of the same people? I stiffened. Because the truth was, yes. I had wondered that. I had wondered if maybe Milena had never really stood a chance, if maybe she had been just as shaped, manipulated, and poisoned by our mother as I had been. If maybe, in some twisted way, she had been just as much of a casualty as I was. But that didn't change what she had done. That didn't change the fact that, when given a choice, she had sided against me. So I said nothing. And maybe she understood the answer anyway, because her voice was calmer when she spoke again. Goodbye, Darina. And for the first time in 11 years, she was the one who hung up first. I stared at my phone, my chest tight, my mind racing with 1,000 things I could have said, things I never would. But then, slowly, I set the phone down. And for the first time since that night, I felt nothing at all.